everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this webcast, From Hack to Response to Training, Unifying Your Security Strategy with Human Risk Management. I'm very excited to have my colleague and friend Keytron Evans with us. Keytron is VP of Portfolio Product and AI Strategy here at Infosec, where he's responsible for leading the vision and the development of our innovative platforms that are really redefining cybersecurity education and human behavior. With over 20 years of experience, Keytron is a cybersecurity expert for sure. He's an AI pioneer and a product visionary. He's also the author of Chained Exploits, Advanced Hacking Attacks from Start to Finish, and a sought-after industry speaker. You may have actually seen him recently at the RSAC conference or at ISACA, or if you're going to Gartner Security and Risk next week, you can catch him there as well. So welcome, Keytron.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Appreciate that great introduction.
So a quick snapshot of what we plan to cover today. First of all, we'll take a look at security awareness program maturity levels and some of the findings from, again, that recent research I mentioned conducted by us and Dark Reading. Then Keytron will demonstrate a phishing attack from three perspectives, the perspective of the attacker, the SOC, and the employee. And then he'll show how a human risk management approach can build upon some of the existing security investments in place to actually more effectively pinpoint a vulnerability like the one that he's demoing. Whether you're just starting this journey or are already implementing some behavioral analytics yourself, you're going to see some practical ways to advance your program's maturity. And then finally, we'll close with some Q&A. So let's start with program maturity. This may not be new to you, but we all know that industry experts agree that more than 90% of organizations today have some form of a security awareness program currently in place. But a majority of these tend to be either A, foundational, and by this I mean they're designed to meet compliance requirements or focus on an annual training event for all employees, or B, they're what we would call personalized, meaning there's a greater frequency of educational moments throughout the year, and they may be tailored to a degree to employee roles or behaviors or potential risk exposure. But even with those two, we're seeing an evolution taking place. More and more security leaders have started to see the results and the impacts of these traditional types of security awareness programs plateauing. They're recognizing that annual training or even some of that more creative, personalized training isn't necessarily resulting in the security behaviors that they'd like to see become habits among their employees. So the big question is then, how do we more effectively influence and change employee security behaviors? What's next? What we're consistently seeing is that the most significant and enduring behavior change progress happens when organizations start to elevate their program beyond awareness to a more integrated, what we would call behavior targeted approach, one that's driven by individual employee risks. That is, identifying these unique risks and behaviors in real time through security tools and behavioral data that you already have to intervene and coach employees in the moment. So one of the key insights from our research conducted with Dark Reading was that elevating a program from simply personalized content to this more hyper-tailored form of behavior coaching doesn't actually require completely replacing your current security awareness and training program. It's really instead about augmenting or enhancing what you already have with some new behavior-driven human risk insights. So I'd like to pause for a moment and just take a poll, first of all, to get a sense for how you're currently personalizing your training programs. So let us know through the poll that you should see on your screen right now. Is your training based on specific threats, users' access to privileged information, a quantified risk score, any of the things that you see here? or maybe none of these things. Feel free to select multiple options that suit your current program. And while we wait for those results to come in, I'm going to share what we learned from our survey with Dark Reading about how organizations are currently approaching personalization. So what we found was that while organizations recognize the value of personalization, there's a clear gap between intention and implementation. In the survey, the respondents' top two approaches that they indicated focused on tailoring content to specific security threats, so things like phishing, password security, remote work, whatever it might be, about 41% of those folks, in fact, and an individual's access to privileged information. Both of these are incredibly important contextual factors, but what's particularly interesting is that only 27% of respondents reported that personalizing training based on actual identified employee behaviors was something that they were doing. And this is really where the greatest potential exists to strengthen security habits. At the same time, we see that about a third of organizations still use standardized training for all their employees. This actually represents a very significant missed opportunity. The opportunity to move beyond that typical one-size-fits-all approach and truly adapt to individual security behaviors. So what you're going to see in today's demo is how a behavior-driven approach, so kind of that middle to far right portion of the maturity model we saw earlier, how that type of approach to managing human risk will enable you to use actual security data to determine the right intervention for each individual employee instead of perhaps guessing what they might need. But let's actually take a look at your poll results and see how they compare to what we found with Dark Reading. So actually, this is quite interesting. Your results mimic exactly what we saw with Dark Reading. So again, you raised specific security threats and access to privileged information as the top two ways that you're personalizing your security training as well. Again, not a bad thing. Those are very foundational. You'll see us focus more and more today on how do we leverage security risk scores? How do we look at prior behaviors? How do we actually take into account maybe different learning preferences? I think interesting to me on this slide, though, is that quite a few of you, about 2/3 of you, are still using a standardized training for all employees. And I anticipate that a lot of that is either A, for compliance reasons, or B, we have that wonderful Cybersecurity Awareness Month every fall. That's definitely the most popular time to do that. But hopefully we'll give you some thoughts today on how you can move beyond that model and start to advance your program as well. So one more question for you. And here we'd like to know, what future steps, if any, do you have to evolve your security awareness program? And again, feel free to select more than one if they apply here. And while you're participating in that poll, I'm going to share what we learned from Dark Reading on this specific question. So according to Dark Reading, and the survey that we conducted, integrating behavioral analytics led the way with 43% of the respondents. This is actually quite promising. Seeing that so many organizations are already anticipating the value that leveraging behavior patterns to effectively target interventions can bring to their security risk program, that's music to our ears, and that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about today. Implementing phishing simulations also remains a priority for about a third of organizations. And while many folks already have some form of phishing tests in place, this may suggest that what they're looking to do is enhance these programs to be more sophisticated. You've probably seen, as we have, that AI is coming on the screen right now to do some of this. What's particularly interesting to me from the survey responses is that real-time coaching or nudging, which is one of the defining characteristics of a more mature human risk management approach, is prioritized by only about 22% of respondents. And we see the integration of behavior analytics and real-time coaching. Those two things need to go hand in hand. So that kind of surprised us a bit. It's true, however, that the foundation of behavioral analytics, again, which scored 43%, is a prerequisite to being able to do the effective nudging. So that's probably what we see reflected here as priorities. Get the behavioral analytics in place first, then do the nudging. Um, but something that we'll talk about. Similarly, only 21% of the respondents were planning for regular employee risk assessments. Again, another missed opportunity that we can leverage. So the key takeaway here is that organizations are planning for different approaches, obviously, to manage human risks. And this really reflects the reality that every security program has a different starting point and has different priorities. But our goal today is to show how these components actually work together, particularly how behavioral analytics can power both nudges and risk assessments to create that complete feedback loop that we need between SecOps and employee behavior. So let's take a look at your responses. So it looks like here, if I'm looking at all the numbers correctly, implementing phishing simulations to improve detection rates is the highest. Again, not surprising there. Again, a critical component of these types of programs, but something that we need to go beyond. It's good to see that close to half of you are planning to integrate behavioral analytics, are planning to conduct employee risk assessments, are looking at improving or integrating with other tools. So that's actually reassuring, and we'll hear more about that. Real-time security coaching or nudges, 40%. Nothing to sneeze at, obviously, but as the fifth lowest or the lowest ranking priority of future steps, that's something you're going to hear a lot about today, and maybe you'll have some ideas that you can take away on how to accomplish that. So right now, I am going to switch it over to you, Keitron. I know this is what everybody's really come to this webcast for. So I'll let you take over for the demo, and then I'll come back on when you're done, and we'll do a little wrap up with a couple more polls and some additional insights.
Sure. Thank you very much, Kristen, for that background information too. So one of the things I want us to think about, to kind of put us in the right frame of mind for this demo is let's just think about the average executive or average business worker within an organization. And I want you to imagine either one or two things, either A, they get an email, it doesn't look suspicious to them, they click on it and it turns out to be something bad, or B, and this is becoming more and more common as people are working remotely, working from home, working in shared like office spaces, going to these little day offices and things like that where they're using Wi-Fi or internet that they don't control. It's becoming more and more common for them to get attacked that way. But either way, imagine a malicious website or a malicious link that gets clicked on. So what we're going to showcase here is if you think about traditional security awareness, what ends up happening is you give people kind of prescribed training on things that you think are important. You maybe do some phishing simulations to see how they perform in those simulations. And then you give them something that usually equates to a risk score based on that, right? And then like we can kind of prescribe more training. We put these people in different risk categories and things like that based on that. But the critical flaw there is that risk profile and that risk assignment that you give them is missing critical information. And you nailed it in the survey when all of you said that when 46% of you said that the thing that is most important is behavioral analytics in that risk scoring, in your prescriptions for training and things of that nature. And my assumption is when you say behavioral, you're talking about at an individual level as well as a company overall, right? So what we're going to show in the demo is why that matters. And we're going to start off with just the kind of letting you see how a compromise might happen and some of the bad things that can happen from that. And then we'll jump right over to an HRM dashboard and I'll show you how, that this attack, while maybe the attacker got the CEO or got the executive, still there's insights that's gained. We saw things that we would have not been able to see before. And more importantly, your risk score will encompass things related to that event. Whereas before HRM and before we started to look at how we would do that, someone would we'd go out and look at people's risk scores and we'd find that people had like perfect risk scores. They were zero or very low risk for the organization. But if you take like the Splunk logs and the CrowdStrike logs and the Mandiant logs and the and all the other security equipment and security stack logs and add that to the equation, suddenly, that person may not look so crispy clean as far as what their risk profile is. So what HRM does is it allows us to bring those things together. So let's go ahead and take a look at the demo here now. So I'm going to share my screen. And you all should now see just a black screen that's got a bunch of command lines up and a bunch of terminals. So what's happened here is I've went through the trouble of setting up all this infrastructure to build out this attack to where if someone clicks on a link, or if I'm on the same network, we're simulating either or. We send someone an email, they clicked on a link, or we happen to be on the same shared Wi-Fi network, like in a Starbucks, at a hotel, in an airport, wherever it may be, because maybe we're tracking or following that CEO or that executive around. But either way, I've set all this infrastructure up. It's kind of just waiting. And what we've done is created basically the environment for what we call a man-in-the-middle attack, or just a simple phishing attack, to where if someone either clicks on a link that we send them, or since they're on the same wireless network in this particular case, let's just imagine a hotel, if they try to go to Facebook or TikTok or something like that, or even your company website, we've kind of put ourselves in between them and the wireless gateway that allows us to get out to the internet and allow stuff back to us, hence the man in the middle. And what we're doing is we're looking at every request that they make, or every request everybody makes out to a website. And if we see them trying to request Facebook in this case, we're sending a response back, doing something called DNS spoofing, that's making them think that Facebook is somewhere it's not. Whereas that somewhere, it's actually on a machine that I control as the attacker. So let's go over to the victim here, which is this, Windows machine. And this is just a setup that I set up just to demo this. Like, I've used this demo a bunch of times for other things. But let's just imagine this person's going to simply try to go to Facebook, right? So I'm going to put that in the browser here. And upon doing that, what we'll notice now is if we go back and look at the attacker side, some things are going to start going on, right? So what's happened is this attacker infrastructure that I've set up, when that person tried to go to Facebook, I got the query for Facebook and sent them back a false response saying that I'm Facebook. So they came to me, I gave them something that looks like Facebook, except that the page that I gave them has a bunch of different types of exploits embedded in it. JavaScript, HTML5, like just all different kinds of exploits that exploit different types of browsers in different situations. So what that allows me to do then is once they go to that Facebook page, and as far as they know, they're still at Facebook, I can now connect to their machine. If I could, spell this properly. And now that I'm on that machine, I want to make sure you see the screen here. So let's do some resizing for a little bit here. And we could just get rid of these ones. They're just distracting right now. So now that I'm on that machine, I could do something called privilege escalation. So this is where we would normally escalate our privileges. And I just want to resize this a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is, the first thing to prove that we have control of that machine. So again, here's our victim. They're looking at Facebook. They're also looking at their Chase bank account. I'm just going to run a screenshot script, right? So we can see what they see. Like, I can see their computer screen. Whatever they're seeing on their desktop, I'm seeing it on my attacker side here. In addition to that, I'm also going to run a keystroke recorder or a keylogger, right? And these are just things that I'm injecting in and out of memory on that machine because I have control of it essentially. But from their perspective, remember, like they don't know anything's going on. So let's just go ahead and log into my Chase Bank account here. I'm gonna log in with Keytron Evans, and then my password is gonna be HRM Rocks. And I'm just gonna fake sign in there or just act like I'm signing in. And then we go over to our attacker machine here. And what I'll do is I'll stop the keystroke recording now and show you that even though the keystrokes were entered on that victim's machine from the victim's perspective, the attacker actually now, let's just read that script, read that text file. The attacker actually got those keystrokes, right? Like, so this person owns the machine. You know, if I wanted to write a file to the desktop, have them click on it, like for example, I could drop into a shell here, go to the desktop, I think this is the context we elevated to. All right, so if we go like to the victim and look at the desktop right now, we'll see that there is no text files or anything like that. So let's just put one there. I'm just gonna create a file. Call it hrmon.txt, just like that. So now if we go back and look at the victim again, we can see that that text file indeed now exists on the desktop, right? So there's no doubt about it. Like there's no debating it. We completely compromised this machine. But here's the thing, because CrowdStrike is running on here, and because we have a Splunk installation, some of the things that just happened, a lot of the things that just happened were noticed by CrowdStrike. Those things are picked up by Splunk, which is our SIM that's looking for any types of log activities or anything like that that's coming from our security stack. So as a result of that, even though this executive or whoever this is might have gotten a perfect score on their last risk assessment because they did great with their traditional phishing tests and their traditional aware ad training and all that, they didn't do so well in this real world situation here. And this is where they actually spend 99% of their time operating, right? They don't operate in that simulation that we give them the phishing simulations with, and that we give them the aware ad where we give them a lesson and then we have them go answer questions. That's not how they operate in real life. In this scenario, this person was operating in real life. They were compromised. But here's the thing. Before HRM, all of these insights that just happened, this event, this incident that this person just caused, would generally not be equated into their risk profile because there was no way to correlate that information with the security and awareness and the dashboards and all the things that we got to. But enter HRM, because now if we go look at our HRM dashboard, this is our right hand who we partner with to do HRM with our Infosec IQ product. If I go to my HRM dashboard here and just look at the alerts for June, that malicious website, that was actually picked up. So it was picked up, Splunk saw that in the log, and Splunk actually sent me an email saying, hey, you did a bad thing. Like it sent that email right away. I would open my email and show you, but like there's some sensitive things that I may not want to be on a public webinar that's in my email. But in my email, there's an email right now that says, hey, guess what? You did something very bad. You went to this website. It was malicious. Here are some things that happened to you based on the logs that we have. By the way, now the administrator for the security and awareness program can choose to or choose not to take these types of events and add that to their risk score, right? And this is the first time in history with the evolution of HRM that we've had the ability to do that. Now, the nudging, which is what happened, how I got the email, all of those things are great, but the real key here, The real part of this that makes it very, very compelling and makes it important for us as we evolve and we start to bring our traditional technical security stack and the non-technical, administration of security and awareness together. This is a key component to how we're going to be able to do that going forward and even doing it today. So that is why HRM is so important. And what you can see now is when we look back at the attack, this person has no idea that anything is going on. This other person, this attacker, has the keys to the kingdom, right? Like they own that machine. Remember, we can do things like we could look at their desktop. We did that, right? Like we can see what they see. There's our new file on the desktop. We can even open up their firewall, right? Like we can reconfigure their machine. We could give ourselves an account. Let's frame Kristen here. No, my demos aren't complete until I frame somebody for doing something. So if we go to this victim machine right now, and let's just check permissions here, check and see who's there. So if we did net users, there's a Kristen, but it's not our Kristen. So we'll do Kristen Z to make sure it's our Kristen, and our Kristen spelled with an I, not an E. So account doesn't exist, right? If we look at the administrators, you can see that those folks are in there, but our Kristen isn't. So watch this. The attacker would have done something like, added Kristen to that computer and went ahead and made her an administrator in the process. Oh, wait, hold on. I forgot to do the add there. There we go. All right, yeah. So it added it because we had already created, it did the first half of the command, so it created an account. So now if we go back, or we can actually look here, if we look at the users, we can see that there is a Kristen with an I now. And then if we look at the group, we can see that Kristen with the I, is she in there? She's not. Let's fix that. And now our Kristen is in there. Kristen Z is in there. So an attacker would have done all these things, but again, as that attacker is doing these things, there are logs being created. CrowdStrike is seeing this. CrowdStrike is these logs are being pulled into Splunk. So all these things are being noticed and being pulled into Splunk, which means now on our dashboard, these things are going to eventually show up, right? So again, this gives an administrator or a security and awareness administrator the ability to encompass and get a much more holistic picture of what this person's risk profile is. This is what all the noise of HRM is all about. Now, sure, there's different types of nudges. Like I got an email nudge. We could have a Teams nudge, a Microsoft Teams. We could have a Slack nudge. However you want to alert or interact with that user to let them know, hey, you did some bad things, and by the way, that's going to come into how we actually rate you when it comes to looking at your security risk score or your risk card when we go back and look forward. What this gives you, it's not just the fact that you can nudge them and bug them, but think about how much more effective your training going forward can be if you're able to give people individualized training like that, and that's another feature of like advanced HRM products, is we're able to say, well, this person, they've went to Keytron's went to a malicious website 5 times a day, and every time his machine got compromised. So maybe instead of like training him on the LinkedIn phishing attack and the Amazon phishing attacks, which he gets 100 on every time, maybe we should train him on not trying to go to Facebook or other social media sites when you're on public Wi-Fi. Or maybe we should tell them to turn on his VPN, remind him to turn on his VPN when he's on public Wi-Fi, so that while that wouldn't have prevented this attack, it would have made it a little bit harder to do, right? So those are the types of insights that as a manager and as an administrator of security awareness you have, and you can combine into this now. And with that, I will turn it back over to Kristen. I think if I can stop sharing here.
Thanks, Keytron. Wow, that was super interesting. Not sure I know how to feel about being framed by you, but made for a great demo. Before I actually continue here, there's a question that came in from Jack specific to the demo that you just gave. He asks, would the attacker be able to clear the log activity to reduce the alerts that came into the platform, or are these logs synced up fairly quickly?
That's a great question. So if I could, I will go back to sharing really quick. Kristen, is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. So actually the answer to that is yes. So let me just show you how that would work. So the thing is the attacker, because they're using something as automated, and we call it script kiddie-ish as interpreter here, like this is very easy to use. The attacker could, so like just, and this again is just a response to the question. So if we went and looked at the event logs, on this machine now. All right, so let's look at the event viewer and look at the Windows logs. So there are a lot of the things that we just did are going to show up in here. There's going to be a lot of things that show up in the system logs, a lot of things that show up in the security logs, right? Like we added Kristen to the administrators group. Guess what? That is right here. These two security group changes, like that's going to show up. So the question is, like, wouldn't an attacker cover their tracks and get rid of that? Well, sure. And it's very easy, actually. Covering tracks is a lot easier to do now than it used to be. But here's the thing. So I'm going to show you that. I'm just going to come over here, and guess what? I'm going to do clear EV. I bet you can't guess what just happened when it says wiping 713 records from security. So I'll tell you, if we go back and look at the security logs now, application's empty, security's empty, system's empty, right? Other than the fact that the log was cleared, which is also an indicator that you got a problem. But yes, they can cover their tracks like that. But here's the thing. Remember, when these events happen, immediately CrowdStrike knew about it. So CrowdStrike created its own log. And then Splunk pulled that log from CrowdStrike, right? And our Splunk instance is running in the cloud, so you can't access it from this local machine. So an attacker would now have to go into AWS or Azure or Google Cloud or wherever we have our Splunk instance, and then compromise that to get rid of the logs there that are a reflection of the logs that were here. So while they may be able to cover it here, still, if you look at a properly set up infrastructure, covering tracks is going to involve much more than just doing it on this machine. So that's the answer to that. And this is why HRM is actually another value add, because it's almost like a third or tertiary, log source, right? So you can go and actually see in, your HRM that, like, look, this thing happened. Like, no matter what logs have been erased, this thing happened. Here's what happened. And this is why we're training this person on it. So great question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. One of the things, we've certainly learned in working with a lot of organizations is that to successfully implement or shift to human risk management, this approach that Keytron has shared, where we're actually leveraging integrations with core systems like your SIM and DLP and those, it really requires some executive sponsorship within your organization. And the purpose or the meaning of that is the fact that it requires SecOps and maybe your training professionals and maybe even GRC to all work together. So it's not just an initiative that's spun out of the training organization. What we've found is that organizations that have highly engaged leadership report better program outcomes because of the cooperation and collaboration between these teams, including reduced security incidents, more efficient resource allocation. With that dark reading survey, we actually asked security leaders how engaged their leadership or executive teams were in supporting a human risk management initiative. And I'd like to ask you the same question. Whether that's for a human risk management strategy you have right now or one that you're planning to put in place, or even for your existing security awareness and training, how engaged is leadership in your human risk management strategy? So again, if you please fill out this one final poll, I'll share what we learned from our research, and then we'll close out for today. So this is what we learned from dark reading, and this was actually really an encouraging finding for us. Nearly 2/3, so 65% of respondents reported that their leadership is either highly engaged or moderately engaged in defining and supporting their organization's human risk management strategy. This level of executive buy-in is critical, again, for the reasons I mentioned before, because a human risk management approach requires cross-functional coordination between SecOps, line of business managers, training professionals. Without that leadership support, these initiatives will often struggle to gain traction. What's particularly interesting is that the 43% that report highly engaged leadership, this suggests that many executives recognize managing human risk is not just a technical problem, but it's a strategic business priority. It's one that deserves attention and deserves resources. At the same time, however, we do see about a quarter of organizations where leadership is minimally engaged or simply aware without providing any active support. If this is your organization, take this as a cautionary flag. If you are looking to mature your program, you will need to get that executive team or leadership team on board, because their support is going to be critical in order to evolve your program. So here's how you came in. Actually not too dissimilar. Again, moderately engaged, highly engaged, the top two. I am thrilled to see that you have that for your programs. Now, you will need to leverage that as you continue to mature to human risk management, because the points of collaboration will be much broader with more teams involved. So that support, leverage it as best you can. For those of you that have minimally engaged, or maybe leadership that's aware of it but provides no active support, find ways to bring that leadership team in, to bring those executives in, to educate them, because you will need that support to be successful in your next phase. So with that, I'm going to open up to a couple other questions that have come in. It looks like we have some time, Keytron, so I'm going to share these with you. One of the first questions from Kelly is, what are you seeing as the most common integration points between existing security tools and a platform, a human risk management platform like this?
It's definitely the SIM solutions like Splunk, QRadar, Exabeam, Logarithm, like whatever big SIM vendor it is that you're used to using. That is one commonplace, because if you think about it, SIMs are kind of like the lifeline and the foundation for most SOC teams. Like SIMs are kind of where all of the logs are correlated and where they can get insights that they can't get from anywhere else. So it makes sense that that was kind of one of the leaders or the early areas that was integrated. So SIMs would be one. Definitely endpoint security solutions like, CrowdStrike, as I mentioned, that I have installed here, Mandiant, just any endpoint security solution is another one that's very common, because again, this is as close as you can get to what the user is actually doing, like on second by second basis. So that's another common point. But that's all on the security stack integration side. But there's other areas too, like threat intelligence feeds and things of that nature, whether we're talking about publicly facing threat intel feeds that you can go and buy or subscribe to, and even private ones, like you might have threat intel for your internal organization. That is also like a key area of interest, and it's emerging as an important one. But I don't want to underestimate like the integrations with Teams, the integrations with Slack and things like that, because that's how you tie together the silly things that we do when we're doing daily computing to letting you know that you just did a silly thing, right? I always tell people the best HRM managers would inevitably be the SOC managers and the SOC team, because they're the ones that are sitting and watching all the crazy things that we do, putting out the fires. They know who the problem children are in the organization that's always clicking on something, always downloading something. So basically, HRM allows the security and awareness community and the admins for human risk to actually have the same views almost as the SOC analysts, to where they can see like the same types of behaviors and things of that nature. So I think that integration with any of the SOC born or SOC, any of the tools and the stacks that live in the SOC, those are like the primary ones right now.
Thank you. I'm actually going to tie in this other question that came in from Travis that is related. He asks, what level of technical expertise is required to implement integrations between security tools and training platforms? And I'm expecting, although I'm not sure 100%, but I'm expecting he's asking this from the perspective of somebody that's running a security awareness and training program, but is not currently sitting in the SOC.
So fortunately for most teams like ours, like if we bring in an HRM solution for you, we will help you with that integration. Like we'll help you get that stood up. But the integrations are pretty straightforward and doesn't require a lot of technical aptitude at all. It's just really getting APIs or getting information from those tools APIs into the HRM platform. And then most mature HRM platforms knows how to take that and normalize it and do the rest with it. So in our experience, most of it's really not any work on the admin other than connecting the HRM vendor to the SOC team or to the owner of those appliances or tools that you want to integrate with. Because most of those tools, like all of your Splunks and QRadars and all your SIM tools, all your endpoint security tools, these things already have the mechanisms in place for that. Like they expected for people to want to integrate over time. And it's just, they're just kind of set up for that nowadays. It's pretty easy.
And I would view this as an opportunity as well, that if you are in charge of your security awareness program, but you're not part of the SOC, this gives you an opportunity to create that relationship with your security operations team. And I think many would actually be happy to be involved in this kind of initiative where they know that this type of data is actually being used to potentially down the road reduce their burden, because hopefully if all goes well and this type of an approach is working, they will have fewer things coming into the SOC that they have to triage around. So
yeah,
good question,
that's one of the
Travis.
that's one of the biggest complaints from those folks is like, we know all this stuff, we collect it, but like nothing changes. People still keep doing the same stuff, right? So having, like you said, Christian, having that relationship, to the other side and bridging that gap, I think will go a long way to kind of, make both sides' jobs easier. Definitely reduction of false positives and reduction of alerts and things like that. Because, if people are actually getting smarter, and it's a fact, they're only going to get smarter if what they're doing wrong is being pointed out. So if we continue just to give them generic tests and generic trainings that's not related to what they're actually doing, they're really not going to get smarter, and that security posture is not going to change much. But I think bridging that gap, having that conversation, like you said, is how we get to where, we really do move that security needle.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question. I think one that we've heard several times already. So thanks, Shankar, for submitting this one. But They ask, when implementing behavioral monitoring for security purposes, what are the privacy considerations I need to be aware of?
Could you repeat that one, Kristen? You cut out for just a second.
Sure. He asks, when implementing behavioral monitoring for security purposes, what are the privacy considerations I need to be aware of?
So it's the same privacy considerations that you have for any security monitoring that you're doing in the org. The thing about HRM is like it's the system that's doing it, and it's not a person, right? That's actually deciding like who gets what treatment and that type thing. But I think it's really the same, concerns that you would have otherwise when you're dealing with security and remediation, right? Like if you see someone click on something and they cause the organization to get compromised, even today, eventually they may have to have a conversation with their manager about that event that happened, right? So we're not saying that those privacy concerns and those things change. We're just saying that now that at scale we can manage it and actually use it to increase awareness around security events and stuff like that.
Now, it looks like we have one final question in the queue here. Do you have any recommendations for getting executive buy-in if leadership is currently minimally engaged in my program?
Yeah, like I mean, one message that I've found effective is kind of just getting the point across that like, look, traditional awareness and training has its place, and it still has a big place in compliance and things like that. But when you talk about actually improving your security posture, it's kind of plateaued in its current state, right? And this is where that next evolution to HRM is necessary if you want to continue to move, that baseline up, improve and actually improve your security posture and not just meet compliance. That's one message that I found to be very helpful in getting that conversation started with administrators because look, executives are being more and more put on the hook for security events. And if you think about it, just look at the Verizon data breach report for the last few years. Like, even though we're doing more and more awareness training and things like that, phishing and social engineering in general are still up there near the top of the number one ways that organizations are being compromised. So we've clearly reached a plateau. And I've actually heard from executives, like, why are we still doing this training? Because every month when we have a board meeting and there's something about a data breach, it always goes back to someone being phished or someone being social engineered in another type of way. So it's clearly not working because it's still how we're getting compromised. But that's because the HRM piece and this, just in general, the things that come with HRM are not in place yet. As you start to put those things in place, you'll start to see that story change a little bit. So for me, I think that those are the messagings that you want to get across to executives. That if you want us to actually affect change, in people's behaviors, we can't change risk without managing risk. So how do we manage risk when it comes to behavior? Well, HRM is how we do that today.
And there is a chance that, depending on what kind of reporting you have available to you now in your security awareness and training platform, you may actually see some of that plateauing happen. So if you have that data, that's something that you can share with executives. I will say the other thing that executives typically care about is, they're less concerned about how many phishing tests did we run, how many people clicked, what were the actual results of those. What they're more interested in is, are we prepared to protect ourselves in the event of a potential attack? How prepared are we? And if we aren't, they're very concerned about what the business ramifications are going to be. They're less concerned about the technical side of things. It's the business outcomes that they're concerned with. Is it going to damage our reputation? If we do have some kind of breach or attack, how long are we going to be down and unproductive or non-productive? during that time frame, because that essentially costs us money and will impact our revenue, right? So I think if you have the ability to share with them, here's where we're plateauing, and the risk of that plateau is it puts our posture at risk, and these are the business outcomes that ultimately could get affected if we don't have the right mechanisms in place to help us identify and triage some of these things in a more appropriate way with our users. So if our users are receiving that in the moment nudge, hey, we saw that you clicked on this phishing email, and provide them that coaching that they need in the moment versus them just getting the annual or even quarterly or even monthly, just general training. Those are the things that will continue to help build your security posture, is catching people with the right message and the right coaching and kind of empowerment in the moment that they need it, based on their specific behavior versus kind of general behavior.
Yeah.
So those were all the questions that we had for today. So I will thank all of you for joining us. If you would like more information, please reach out to us at any time. We're happy to answer your human risk management questions, or essentially any questions you have about training for you or your team. Have a great rest of your day.